Welcome back to Lena's Romantasy Collection, your home for the steamiest, most emotional werewolf and paranormal romance stories. Today, we have a story that is going to set your screen on fire. It features a badass career woman who refuses to bow down, a toxic ex who needs to learn a lesson, and a possessive alpha king who speaks the language of mine. If you love strong heroines and alphas who fall harder than they expected, you are in the right place. Before we dive into I Wore Red to the Gala, Alpha King threw his coat on me, no one sees this but me. Please take a second to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow, and make sure you are subscribed with the notification bell turned on so you never miss a new release. Now, grab your headphones and get comfortable. Let's find out what happens when you wear a revenge dress to the Alpha's party.
Chapter 1. The Fixer in Heels. I don't care if the CEO was photographed with a goat, 2 showgirls, and a bag of unauthorized marshmallows. Deny the marshmallows, admit to the goat as a charity initiative, and bury the showgirls under the quarterly earnings report. Do I have to do everything myself? Sloane Vane ended the call and tossed her phone onto the mahogany desk. It slid across the polished surface, stopping inches from the edge. She didn't look at it. She was too busy massaging her temples, trying to push a migraine back into the depths of her brain. At 29, Sloane was the youngest senior crisis manager at Gantry & Associates. She was the woman corporate giants called when they messed up. She was expensive, she was exhausted, and she was brilliant. "You look like you're plotting a murder," a voice chirped from the doorway. It was Mia, her assistant, holding a triple shot espresso like a peace offering. "Just a justifiable homicide," Sloane muttered, taking the coffee. "The Henderson account is a disaster, but I fixed it again." "You always do," Mia said, her face falling slightly. "Which is why Gantry wants to see you. It's about the Sterling merger." The air in the office seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sloane froze, the coffee cup halfway to her lips. "Sterling," she repeated, the name tasting like ash. "Julian Sterling?" "He's blocking the contract, Sloane," Mia whispered, looking sympathetic. "He says there are communication issues with the PR team. He's specifically requesting a review of your lead." Sloane set the coffee down hard. Julian. Her ex, the man she spent 5 years supporting while he was just a promising heir with daddy issues. She had edited his college papers, smoothed over his social blunders, and stood by him when his father threatened to disown him. And how had he repaid her? By dumping her the week before he took over the company because she didn't fit the Sterling aesthetic. Apparently, a girl who grew up in foster care and worked for a living wasn't trophy wife material. That was 5 years ago. Now, she was the best in the city, and he was using his billion-dollar inheritance to torment her. "He doesn't have communication issues," Sloane said, standing up and smoothing her pencil skirt. Her eyes flashed with cold determination. "He has an ego the size of a blimp and the emotional maturity of a teaspoon. If he wants a review, I'll give him one." "Be careful," Mia warned. "Gantry's already sweating. The Sterling account is half our projected revenue for the year." "I know. That's why Julian is doing this. He knows he has leverage, but he's forgetting one thing." "What's that?" "I know where all his skeletons are buried," Sloane said, checking her lipstick in the reflection of her computer monitor. "And I brought the shovel." Chapter 2. The Gaslight. The conference room at Sterling Industries was designed to make people feel small. The table was too long, the chairs were too low, and the air conditioning was set to Arctic. Sloane sat at one end, her spine steel straight. At the other end sat Julian Sterling. He looked good. That was the annoying part. He had the kind of blonde, old money looks that belonged on a polo field, but Sloane knew the rot underneath. "Your proposal is aggressive, Sloane," Julian said, flipping through the file she had spent 3 nights perfecting. He didn't even look up. "It lacks refinement. It feels a bit desperate." Sloane didn't flinch. "It's a crisis management strategy for a hostile takeover, Julian. It's supposed to be aggressive. Refinement gets you eaten alive in this market. You know that. Or did you forget how I saved your ass during the EPA scandal last year?" Julian finally looked up. His blue eyes were cold, filled with a smug amusement that made Sloane's skin crawl. "Past favors don't excuse current incompetence," he said smoothly. The other executives in the room shifted uncomfortably. They knew Sloane was the best. They knew she was the reason their stock hadn't tanked last quarter, but none of them would speak up against the boss. "Incompetence?" Sloane let out a sharp, dry laugh. "My incompetence brought your firm a 40% increase in public trust rating. This isn't about the proposal, Julian. Stop wasting everyone's time." Julian leaned back, crossing his arms. "You've always been so emotional, Sloane. This is why we didn't work out. You can't separate business from your us outbursts. You're too loud, too much." Gaslighting. Textbook. He was trying to make her look unstable in front of the board. "I am professional," Sloane said, her voice deadly calm, "and I am done being lectured on refinement by a man who once called me at 3 a.m. crying because he couldn't figure out how to tie a Windsor knot." The room went silent. A few executives coughed to hide their grins. Julian's face turned a mottled shade of red. He stood up, slamming the file shut. "Meeting adjourned. And Sloane, if you want to keep this account, you'd better change your attitude. I hear Gantry is looking for budget cuts. It would be a shame if you were one of them." He stormed out. Sloane remained seated, her hands trembling slightly under the table, not from fear, but from the sheer effort of not throwing her laptop at his head. He was threatening her livelihood because she dared to be successful without him. Chapter 3. The Ultimatum. Mr. Gantry was a man who looked like a melted candle in a cheap suit. He was sweating when Sloane walked into his office an hour later. "Sit down, Vane," he barked, not looking at her. "I can explain the meeting," Sloane started, but Gantry held up a hand. "I don't care about the meeting. Julian Sterling just called me. He says you were hostile. He says he's thinking of pulling the account and taking it to Miller & Co." "Miller & Co. couldn't PR their way out of a paper bag," Sloane argued. "Julian is bluffing. He needs me. He's just trying to exert control because of your personal history," Gantry shouted, slamming his fist on the desk. "I don't care who dumped who, Vane. I care about the six-figure retainer fee." Sloane grit her teeth. "I brought in that retainer fee. I brought in the Sterling account. I brought in the Tech Corp deal. I am the reason this firm is solvent. And you'll be the reason we go under if Julian walks." Gantry stood up, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "I'm not letting your ego sink this ship." He pointed a chubby finger at her. "The Winter Solstice Charity Gala is in 3 days. Julian will be there. He's the keynote donor." "I know. I'm on the invite list." "You are going to that gala," Gantry ordered, "and you are going to apologize to Julian. You are going to smooth this over. You will be charming, you will be submissive, and you will make him feel like the smartest man in the room. If he doesn't sign the renewal contract by Monday morning, don't bother coming in." Sloane stared at him. "You're threatening to fire me after everything I've done?" "I'm telling you to do your job," Gantry said coldly. "Fix it, Sloane, or you're finished." Sloane walked out of the office, her heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood. Her head was held high, but inside she felt like the floor was crumbling. She had clawed her way up from nothing. She had built this career brick by brick, and now 2 men, one a coward, one a narcissist, were about to tear it all down. She needed a drink, a strong one. Chapter 4. The Stranger at the Bar. The Velvet Note was a dark, subterranean jazz bar that smelled of expensive bourbon and old leather. It was Sloane's sanctuary. No one from the corporate world came here. It was too dark for Instagram photos. Sloane slid onto a stool at the far end of the bar. "Whiskey, neat. Leave the bottle," she told the bartender. She took a long sip, letting the burn settle her nerves. "Rough day?" A deep voice rumbled from the shadows to her left. Sloane didn't look over immediately. She just saw a massive shape in her peripheral vision. "Rough life." Day was just the cherry on top. She turned her head slightly. The man sitting 2 stools away was substantial. That was the only word for it. He was broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car. He had dark hair, a sharp jawline covered in stubble, and eyes that were an unsettling shade of amber. He wasn't drinking. He was just sitting there, completely still, watching the room with a predator's intensity. "You look like you're guarding the crown jewels," Sloane quipped, gesturing to his rigid posture. "Relax, big guy, it's a jazz bar, not a funeral." The man turned to look at her. His gaze was heavy, like a physical weight pressing against her skin. Most men looked at her with lust or calculation. This man looked at her like he was solving a complex equation. "I don't like surprises." His voice was a low baritone that vibrated in her chest. "Join the club," Sloane muttered, taking another drink. "I'm Sloane. And before you ask, no, I don't want to hear about your crypto portfolio." The corner of the man's mouth twitched. "I don't own crypto. I prefer tangible assets." "Let me guess," Sloane said, pivoting on her stool to face him fully. The whiskey was making her bold. "Real estate? Oil? Or are you one of those guys who buys islands just to feel like a Bond villain?" "Something like that," he murmured. "I'm Siren." "Well, Siren," Sloane sighed, resting her chin in her hand, "if you have any advice on how to deal with a narcissistic ex-boyfriend who controls my career, I'm all ears." Siren shifted, turning his full attention to her. The air around him felt charged, static electricity crackling against her arm. "He threatens you," Sloane corrected. "Financially. He thinks he can break me because he has the money and I have the audacity." "Audacity is a valuable currency," Siren said softly. "More valuable than gold if used correctly." Sloane laughed. "You sound like a fortune cookie written by a warlord." "And you talk too much," Siren replied, but there was no bite in it. In fact, his eyes were dancing with amusement. "It's refreshing."
Chapter 5. The Glare. "Hey, sweetheart, why are you talking to the wall?" The voice was slurred and loud, cutting through the smooth jazz. A man in a rumpled shirt stumbled up to Sloane, leaning heavily on the bar. He smelled of stale beer and bad decisions. Sloane stiffened. "I'm busy. Walk away." "Aw, come on," the drunk guy sneered, reaching out to grab her arm. "Don't be a bitch. Let me buy you a—" Before his fingers could graze her silk blouse, the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Sieran didn't stand up. He didn't yell. He didn't even raise a hand. He simply turned his head and looked at the drunk man. Sloane watched, confused. Sieran just stared. But it wasn't a normal stare. It was a look of such primal, concentrated violence that the air seemed to thicken. A low sound, almost like a growl too deep for human ears to fully register, vibrated from his chest. The drunk man froze. His face went pale, then gray. His eyes widened in sheer animalistic terror, as if he were looking into the jaws of a monster. He started trembling, actually shaking in his shoes. I, the drunk stammered. He backed away, tripping over his own feet, and then practically ran out the door, knocking over a chair in his haste. Sloane blinked. She looked from the empty doorway back to Sieran. He was calmly picking up his glass of water, the terrifying aura gone, as if it never existed. "What was that?" she asked, eyes wide. "Did you hypnotize him?" Sieran took a sip of water. "I just reminded him of his manners." "Reminded him?" Sloane scoffed, though her heart was pounding. "You looked at him like you were going to eat his soul. Do you practice that in the mirror?" Sieran looked at her, and for a second, Sloane saw a flash of something gold and wild in his eyes before it vanished. "Only on Tuesdays," he deadpanned. He stood up, towering over her. He was even taller than she thought, at least 6'4". He placed a bill on the counter to cover her drinks. "Hey, I can pay for myself," Sloane protested, her pride flaring up. "I know you can," Sieran said. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. She could smell rain, pine, and something uniquely masculine. "Keep your audacity, Sloane. You're going to need it." He turned and walked away, his heavy black trench coat billowing slightly behind him. Sloane watched him go, a strange shiver running down her spine. She didn't know who he was, but for the first time all day, she didn't feel like the prey. She felt like she had just met the apex predator. Chapter 6. War Paint. Sloane stood in front of her full-length mirror, the garment bag unzipped at her feet. Inside was not the modest beige cocktail dress Gantry had suggested she wear to look apologetic. Inside was a weapon. It was a crimson silk gown, backless with a plunging neckline and a slit that ran dangerously high up her thigh. It was the kind of dress that started rumors. It was the kind of dress that said, "I don't need your money, and I certainly don't need your approval." "Gantry wants submissive," Sloane whispered to her reflection. She applied a layer of blood-red lipstick, her hand steady despite the chaotic thumping of her heart. "He wants me to beg. He wants me to crawl back to Julian and ask for forgiveness for being better at my job than he is." She pinned her dark hair up, leaving a few tendrils loose to frame her sharp jawline. She looked like a femme fatale from a noir film, beautiful, dangerous, and entirely unbothered. "Sorry, boys," she murmured, stepping into the dress and zipping it up. The silk hugged her curves like a second skin. "I don't do submissive." She grabbed her clutch, which contained her resignation letter just in case things went south, and checked her bank account one last time. It was healthy, thanks to her obsessively saving every bonus check for 5 years. She wasn't rich like the Sterlings, but she had FU money, and tonight she planned to spend it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mia. "Gantry is already there. He's drinking. Good luck." Sloane took a deep breath. She wasn't going to the winter solstice gala to save her job. She realized that now. She was going to prove a point. She was going to walk into that room, head high, and show Julian Sterling exactly what he had thrown away. If she was going down, she was going down in flames. And she was going to look spectacular doing it. Chapter 7. The Lion's Den. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was dripping in gold and crystals. A string quartet played something polite and boring in the corner, while the city's elite mingled, sipping champagne that cost more than Sloane's rent. When Sloane walked in, the room didn't just go quiet. The silence rippled outward from the door like a wave. Heads turned, conversations halted mid-sentence. In a sea of black tuxedos and pastel ball gowns, Sloane was a strike of lightning. The red dress was vibrant, aggressive, and stunning. She walked with a predator's grace, her heels clicking a steady rhythm on the marble floor. She saw Mr. Gantry near the buffet. His jaw literally dropped, a shrimp puff falling from his hand. He looked like he was about to have a stroke. He had ordered her to be humble. She had arrived looking like the Queen of Hearts. Sloane ignored him. She scanned the room for her target. There he was, Julian Sterling. He was holding court near the center of the room, laughing at some sycophant's joke. He looked perfectly groomed, perfectly rich, and perfectly hollow. When his eyes landed on Sloane, the laugh died in his throat. For a second, she saw raw hunger in his eyes. He looked at her the way a starving man looks at a feast. But then the entitlement kicked in. His expression hardened into a sneer of possessiveness and disdain. He excused himself from his group and began walking toward her. He moved with the confidence of a man who owned the building. "Show time," Sloane muttered to herself, grabbing a glass of champagne from a passing tray. She didn't drink it. She just needed something to hold so she wouldn't punch him. "Sloane," Julian said as he reached her. He didn't say hello. He just looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on the slit of her dress. "What do you think you're doing?" "I believe it's called attending a party, Julian," Sloane said, offering him a tight plastic smile. "You sent the invite, remember?" "I expected you to have some shame," Julian hissed, stepping closer so their conversation remained private. "After the mess you made in the boardroom, you come here dressed like a high-priced escort?" Sloane's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went cold. "Careful, Julian. If you keep looking at me like that, people will think you're still in love with me. Or is that drool on your chin?" Chapter 8. The Cornered Queen. Julian's face flushed a deep, ugly red. He grabbed her upper arm, hard. His fingers dug into her bare skin, painful and possessive. "You think you're so smart," he whispered, his breath hot and smelling of expensive scotch. "But you're nothing without me. Gantry told me everything. You're one bad review away from being unemployed, and guess who holds the pen? Sloane tried to pull her arm away, but his grip tightened. Let go of me, Julian. You're making a scene. I'm saving you from yourself, Julian countered, pulling her slightly toward the side exit. You look cheap. Everyone is staring at you, laughing at you. I'm going to take you out the back, get you a coat, and send you home before you embarrass my company any further. I don't work for your company, Sloane snapped, digging her heels in, and I don't need saving. Stop fighting me. Julian's voice rose, cracking the veneer of his polite society persona. A few people nearby glanced over, looking uncomfortable but doing nothing to intervene. That was the rule of the elite. Never interfere with a Sterling. Sloane felt a spike of genuine fear, not because Julian could hurt her physically, she had taken kickboxing classes, but because he was stripping away her dignity in front of the entire city. He was reducing her to an unruly child being scolded. I said, let go, Sloane said, her voice sharp. You belong to me, Sloane, Julian snarled, his eyes glazing over with a toxic mix of lust and rage. Now you come outside before I... The air in the ballroom suddenly changed. It wasn't just a shift in mood, it was a physical drop in pressure. The hair on Sloane's arms stood up. The chatter in the room died instantly, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. Julian froze. His grip on her arm loosened, his eyes widening as he looked over Sloane's shoulder. He looked like a dog that had just realized it wandered into a lion's cage. Sloane turned her head. Standing 3 feet away was the man from the bar, Kieran. But he didn't look like the man from the bar anymore. He looked like a god of war dressed in a tuxedo. His amber eyes were glowing, actually glowing with a terrifying golden light. His lips were pulled back in a snarl that exposed teeth that looked too white, too sharp. Chapter 9. The Alpha's Claim. Ciaran didn't speak. He moved. The motion was a blur, faster than any human should be able to move. 1 second he was standing 3 feet away, the next he was between Sloane and Julian. He didn't hit Julian, he didn't have to. Ciaran simply stepped into Julian's personal space, radiating waves of pure, unadulterated dominance. It was a primal force, an invisible weight that crushed the air out of the lungs. Julian released Sloane instantly, stumbling back as if he'd been burned. He was shaking, his face drained of all color, gasping for air as if he were drowning. Sloane stood there, stunned, rubbing her bruised arm. She looked up at Ciaran, expecting him to be looking at Julian. But he wasn't. He was looking at her. His eyes swept over her, from the red lipstick to the plunging neckline, down to the high slit of the dress. His pupils were blown wide, swallowing the iris. His jaw ticked, a muscle jumping in his cheek as he fought for control. He was furious, not at her, but for her. And he was jealous, violently, irrationally jealous that other men were seeing her like this. Ciaran, she whispered, her voice trembling. He didn't answer. In one fluid, aggressive motion, he ripped off his heavy black wool trench coat. He swung it around, throwing it over Sloane. The heavy fabric engulfed her, covering her head, her shoulders, and the scandalous red dress completely. It smelled of him, pine, rain, and raw power. He pulled the lapels tight, essentially swaddling her, hiding her from the world. He pulled her into his chest, his large hand cupping the back of her head through the coat, pressing her face against his tuxedo shirt. Then he turned to Julian. The entire room was silent enough to hear a pin drop. Ciaran leaned forward, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through Sloane's entire body. No one sees this but me. It wasn't a request, it was a law. Julian whimpered. Actually whimpered. He scrambled backward, knocked over a waiter's tray of champagne flutes with a deafening crash, and fled. He ran out of the ballroom like the devil himself was snapping at his heels. Ciaran didn't chase him. He just held Sloane there, wrapped in his darkness, shielding her from every prying eye in the room. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice suddenly dropping to a rough whisper, intended only for her. Sloane, muffled inside the coat, blinded by the fabric, but surrounded by his scent, could only nod. I think so. You just assaulted a billionaire with a coat." "He's lucky it was just a coat," Ciaran growled, his arm tightening around her waist. "Let's go. We're leaving."
Chapter 10. The Fallout. The drive away from the gala was a blur. Ciaran had practically carried her to his car, a sleek black beast of a vehicle that looked like the Batmobile's angry cousin. He had dropped her off at her apartment with a lingering look and a promise to check on her. Sloane hadn't slept. She had spent the night pacing, replaying the scene, the way Julian had looked so terrified, the way Ciaran's eyes had glowed, the way she had felt safe, terrifyingly safe, wrapped in that coat. The next morning, the reality hangover hit. She walked into Gantry and Associates at 8 a.m. The office was quiet, too quiet. Mia wasn't at her desk. She was standing by Sloane's office door, holding a cardboard box. She was crying. "Sloane," Mia choked out, "I'm so sorry." Sloane stopped. Her stomach dropped to her shoes. "What happened?" "Gantry," Mia sniffled. He said you caused a violent spectacle at the gala. He said Julian pulled the contract this morning. The whole merger is dead." The door to Gantry's office flew open. Mr. Gantry stood there, his face purple with rage. "You!" he screamed, pointing at Sloane. The entire office floor stopped working to watch. "You are finished, Vane. Get your things and get out." Sloane straightened her spine. The migraine from the night before was back, throbbing behind her eyes. "You're firing me because Julian Sterling is a coward?" "I'm firing you because you are a liability," Gantry yelled, spit flying. "You and your boyfriend terrorized our biggest client. Julian is threatening to sue us for emotional distress. Emotional distress!" Sloane almost laughed. It was absurd. "Julian assaulted me, Gantry, or does that not matter because his checkbook is bigger than mine?" "I don't care," Gantry roared. "You're done, blacklisted. I'll make sure you never work in PR in this city again." Sloane looked at the man she had made millions for. She looked at the office she had practically lived in for 3 years. She took the cardboard box from Mia's shaking hands. She didn't cry. She refused to give him that satisfaction. "You're making a mistake, Gantry," she said, her voice calm, cold, and clear. "Julian is going to tank that company within 6 months without me, and when he does, don't call me." "Out!" Gantry screamed. Sloane turned on her heel. She walked to the elevator, her head held high, clutching the box of her belongings. She was unemployed. She was blacklisted. Her career was in ashes. She stepped out onto the busy city street, the cold wind biting at her cheeks. She took a deep breath. "Well," she said to the empty air, "that went well." A black car pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down. Ciaran Thorne sat in the driver's seat, wearing dark sunglasses. He didn't look at her. He just unlocked the passenger door. "Get in," he said. "Are you stalking me?" Sloane asked, though she was already reaching for the handle. "I'm recruiting. I heard you have some free time." Chapter 11. The Severance Package. The interior of Ciaran's car smelled like expensive leather and safety. It was quiet, shutting out the noise of the city and the disaster that was Sloane's life. Sloane buckled her seatbelt, clutching the cardboard box containing her stapler, a half-dead succulent, and her framed degree like a shield. "So," Sloane said, staring straight ahead, "how did you know?" "I own the building," Ciaran said casually, merging into traffic with a smoothness that defied physics. "And I have friends on the board. I knew Gantry was going to cut you loose the moment Julian made the call." Sloane let out a bitter laugh. "Efficient. Did you come to watch the carnage, or did you just need a tax write-off for saving a damsel?" Ciaran glanced at her. The sunglasses hid his eyes, but his jaw was tight. "I don't do charity, Sloane, and you aren't a damsel. A damsel would be crying. You look like you're planning a hostile takeover."
I'm considering it, but first, I need a drink and a job, preferably in that order. I can offer both, Siren said. He took a sharp turn, heading away from the business district and toward the older industrial side of the city, the Iron District. It was an area known for high-end lofts and exclusive members-only clubs. I'm not being your assistant, Siren, Sloane warned, her pride flaring up again. I don't fetch coffee, I don't manage calendars, and I certainly don't entertain clients. Siren actually chuckled. It was a low, rumbling sound that made the leather seat vibrate beneath her. I have people to fetch coffee. I need you for something else, something messier. Messier than Julian Sterling's ego? Much, Siren said. He pulled the car up to the curb in front of a massive black brick building. There was no signage, just a heavy steel door and a line of velvet ropes that looked like they hadn't been used in years. Welcome to the Obsidian, Siren said, killing the engine. My headache, your new project. Chapter 12. The Negotiation. The inside of the Obsidian was cavernous. It was a nightclub, but it felt more like a fortress. The aesthetic was gothic industrial chic. Lots of dark metal, exposed brick, and shadows. It was empty, save for a few staff members who were moving crates near the bar. When Siren walked in, every single one of them stopped. They didn't just look at him, they froze, lowered their heads, and practically held their breath until he passed. Weird management style, Sloane thought. Terror-based? Siren led her up a spiral staircase to a glass-walled office overlooking the dance floor. He gestured for her to sit in a leather armchair that looked like a throne. Here is the situation, Siren said, leaning against his desk, crossing his arms. The muscles in his forearms strained against his dress shirt. This club is profitable, but it has a reputation problem. Let me guess, Sloane said, looking around. It looks like a vampire lair? People think you sacrifice goats in the basement? Close, Siren said, his face stiffened. We value privacy, exclusivity, but the city council is threatening to revoke our liquor license because of noise complaints and suspicious activity. They think we're a front for the mob. Are you? Sloane asked point blank. No, Siren said. We are a sanctuary for people who don't fit in elsewhere. Wolves, and occasionally others with scales or fangs. But we need to look legitimate. We need a public face, someone to handle the press, smooth over the neighbors, and make us look like a respectable establishment. Sloane tapped her fingers on her knee. You want a rebrand. You want me to take this, she gestured to the dark, brooding atmosphere, and make it palatable for the Chamber of Commerce? I want you to protect my people, Siren said. His voice dropped an octave. The intensity in his tone surprised her. Julian blacklisted you from the corporate world, Sloane, but the nightlife industry, it's the Wild West. His influence doesn't reach here. I'll pay you double what Gantry paid you. Sloane's eyebrows shot up. Double? And full autonomy, Siren added. You run the PR. You handle the city council. No one questions you. Not even me. Sloane looked at him. He was offering her a lifeline, a fortune, and freedom, but she still felt the sting of the charity accusation. I'll take the job, Sloane said slowly, on one condition. Name it. I don't want a handout. I want a contract. 6 months. If I save your license and boost your public rating, I get a percentage of the annual profit. If I fail, you don't pay me a dime. Siren smiled. It was a slow, dangerous smile that made her toes curl. You like to gamble. I bet on sure things, Sloane replied. Do we have a deal? Deal, Siren said, extending his hand. When Sloane shook it, she felt a jolt of static electricity so strong it almost hurt. Siren didn't let go immediately. He held her hand for a second too long, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. Welcome to the pack, Sloane, he whispered. Chapter 13. The Welcome Committee. The next morning, Sloane arrived at the Obsidian at 9 a.m. sharp, armed with a laptop, a venti coffee, and mission. She walked up to the front entrance. A man was standing guard. He was at least 6'7", built like a refrigerator, with a shaved head and a scar running down his neck. Name, the giant grunted, crossing arms the size of tree trunks. Sloan Vane, I'm the new director of communications. Move aside, please. The giant sniffed. He literally leaned down and sniffed her hair. Sloan froze. Excuse me? Did you just smell me? Is that the new security protocol? Checking for unauthorized perfume? The giant blinked, looking confused. You smell like him. Him? Sloan asked. If by him you mean coffee and anxiety, then yes. Now, are you going to let me in, or do I have to call Siren? At the mention of Siren's name, the giant's eyes widened. He immediately stepped aside, opening the heavy door for her. Sorry, ma'am. Go right in. I'm Bram. Nice to meet you, Bram, Sloan said, adjusting her blazer. Work on the sniffing thing. It's bad for customer service. She walked inside. The club was in day mode, which meant the cleaning crew was there. Sloan set up her temporary desk on a table near the bar. She started typing up a press release. 10 minutes later, she realized she was being watched. She looked up. 3 bartenders were standing at the other end of the bar, staring at her. They were whispering. Is that her? The alpha brought her. She's human. Can she be here? She smells like the coat. Sloan slammed her laptop shut. Okay, class is in session, she announced, her voice echoing in the empty club. The 3 bartenders jumped. I can hear you, Sloan said, walking over to them. I don't know what kind of rumors are circulating, but yes, I am the new PR manager. Yes, I am human, which I assume is the default setting for everyone here, unless you guys are secretly hobbits. And yes, I am going to turn this place into the hottest venue in the city. Any questions? The bartenders looked at each other nervously. One of them, a guy with shaggy brown hair, raised his hand. Yes? Sloan asked. Are you going to make us wear uniforms? He asked, looking terrified. Sloan looked at his tattered Metallica t-shirt. Effective immediately? Yes. Black button-downs. And for the love of God, comb your hair. We are going for mysterious allure, not just rolled out of a dumpster.
Chapter 14. The Alpha's Shadow. By noon, Sloan had reorganized the filing system, drafted a statement for the city council, and fired the guy who delivered the ice because he was rude to the cleaning lady. She was on a roll. She was standing on a chair in the middle of the dance floor, directing Brahm, the giant bouncer, on where to hang a new lighting fixture when Siren walked in. He was wearing a black t-shirt and jeans, looking less like a CEO and more like a dangerous construction worker. He stopped when he saw her. Sloan, he said, his voice carrying across the room without him raising it. Get down from the chair. I'm busy, Siren, Sloan called back, pointing at the ceiling. Brum, move it 2 inches to the left. We need to highlight the architecture, not hide it. Left, got it, Brum grunted, obeying her instantly. Siren walked over to the chair. He looked up at her, then over at Brum. He seemed baffled. Brum doesn't take orders from anyone but me. Well, he takes orders from me now, Sloan said, climbing down. She wobbled slightly in her heels, and Siren's hands shot out to catch her waist. His grip was firm, warm, and electric. He didn't let go once she was steady. You've been here 4 hours, Siren said, looking down at her, and you've already terrorized my head of security and reorganized the staff. They needed direction, Sloan said, breathless but trying to hide it. Your staff is odd, Siren. They're very loyal, but they act like a cult. Brahm sniffed me. The bartenders stare at me like I'm a science experiment, and I'm pretty sure the dishwasher growled at the delivery guy. Siren's eyes darkened slightly. They aren't used to outsiders. I'm not an outsider anymore, Sloan said, poking him in the chest. It was like poking a marble statue. I'm on the payroll, which means they need to get used to me, and you need to stop looming. Looming? Siren raised an eyebrow. Yes, you radiate this heavy energy. It scares people. You need to smile more. Try it. Siren looked at her like she had asked him to grow wings. No. Come on, just a half smile, for the press. Siren leaned in closer, his lips brushing her ear. I don't smile for the press, Sloan. I bite. Sloan shivered. It wasn't from fear. Well, she managed to squeak out. We'll work on that.
Chapter 15. Oddities. Over the next week, Sloane settled into a rhythm. She worked 14-hour days, fueled by spite and espresso. She was determined to make the obsidian untouchable, just to prove Gantry and Julian wrong. But the more time she spent at the club, the harder it was to ignore the weirdness. Exhibit A, the appetite. She ordered lunch for the staff on Tuesday, 20 pizzas. They were gone in 4 minutes. She watched a guy named Kale eat an entire meat lover's pizza in 3 bites, including the crust. Exhibit B, the healing. On Thursday, a glass shattered behind the bar, slicing the bartender's hand open. It was a deep cut, bleeding profusely. Sloane ran to get the first aid kit. By the time she came back, maybe 60 seconds later, the bartender was wiping up the blood. His hand was completely unblemished, not even a scar. "Good concealer?" Sloane had asked, suspicious. Yeah, Sephora," the bartender had stammered. Exhibit C, the temperature. Kieran. He was always hot. Literally, whenever he stood next to her, he radiated heat like a furnace. And he never wore a jacket, even when it was 40 degrees outside. It was late Friday night. Sloane was in her glass office, finishing up the budget. The club was closed. She thought she was alone. She heard a noise downstairs, a heavy metallic thud. Sloane frowned. She walked to the railing and looked down. Kieran was down there. He was shirtless. His back was to her, revealing a landscape of corded muscle and old, faint, silvery scars. He was lifting a massive keg of beer, one that usually required a dolly and 2 men to move. He was lifting it with one hand, effortlessly, like it was a pillow. Sloane watched, her mouth slightly open. He set the keg down and rolled his neck, the muscles rippling. "Okay," Sloane whispered to herself, stepping back into the shadows. "So my boss is on steroids, or he's Captain America, or—" She touched her chest where her heart was hammering. She shouldn't be watching. It felt invasive, but she couldn't look away. Suddenly, Kieran stiffened. He didn't turn around, but he tilted his head back, inhaling deeply. "Sloane," Kieran said, his voice echoing in the empty club. "Stop hiding in the dark. Come down here." He knew she was there without even looking. Sloane took a deep breath, smoothed her skirt, and walked toward the stairs. "I wasn't hiding, I was supervising. And put a shirt on, Kieran, you're violating HR policy." Kieran turned around, a smirk playing on his lips. "I am HR." Chapter 16. The Scent of Blood. The tension in the office was palpable. For 3 days, Ciaran had been hovering, not in a micromanaging way, but in a predatory way. He would stand in the doorway while she worked, just watching her fingers move across the keyboard. "You're doing it again," Sloane said without looking up from her spread of invoices. "Doing what?" Ciaran asked, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Staring. It's unnerving. Don't you have an underworld empire to run?" "The club is the empire," Ciaran replied smoothly. He walked into the room. "And you smell stressed." Sloane rolled her eyes. "I am stressed. The liquor license hearing is tomorrow and the printer jammed. Again." She reached for a stack of papers to shove them into the feeder. In her haste, the sharp edge of a fresh cardstock flyer sliced across the pad of her thumb. "Ouch," Sloane hissed, dropping the papers. She instinctively brought her thumb to her mouth, sucking on the small cut. The reaction in the room was instant. Ciaran didn't just turn, he snapped to attention. His head whipped toward her, his nostrils flaring. The playful atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a thick, heavy silence. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He grabbed her wrist, gentle but firm, pulling her hand away from her mouth. "Let me see," he commanded. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. "It's a paper cut, Ciaran, not an amputation," Sloane said, trying to pull back. But she couldn't. His grip was iron. Ciaran stared at the tiny bead of bright red blood welling up on her skin. His eyes darkened, the amber irises swallowing the pupils until they looked almost black. He seemed to be fighting a war within himself. He lifted her hand. For a terrifying, electrifying second, Sloane thought he was going to lick the blood away. Her breath hitched, her heart hammering against her ribs. Instead, he pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and pressed it to her thumb. He held it there, his thumb rubbing soothing circles over the back of her hand. "Be careful," he whispered, his voice strained. The scent, it carries. It carries? Sloane blinked, her pulse racing. Sierran, it's one drop of blood. To me, it's a beacon, he murmured, looking into her eyes. The intensity was overwhelming. You have no idea how loud you are, Sloane, even when you're silent. He released her hand abruptly and walked to the window, putting distance between them. Sloane looked at her thumb. The bleeding had stopped, but the tingling where he touched her remained. She looked at his back. You're weird, Sierran Thorne. You have no idea, he replied to the glass.
Chapter 17. The Snake Returns. The next afternoon, Sierran was out meeting with suppliers, which Sloane assumed meant intimidating beverage distributors. She was alone at the Obsidian, prepping for the night's soft opening. The front door chimed. "We're not open yet," Sloane called out from behind the bar, where she was checking inventory. "I'm not here for a drink, Sloane. I'm here for an inspection." The voice made her blood run cold. She stood up slowly. Julian Sterling stood in the entrance. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by two men in cheap suits who looked like off-duty cops. "Julian," Sloane said, wiping her hands on a rag. She kept her voice steady, masking the spike of adrenaline. "I didn't know you frequented the Iron District. Isn't this a bit below your tax bracket?" Julian smirked, walking further into the room. He looked around with a sneer of disgust. "It is, but I have an interest in urban development. I'm buying the block, Sloane. I'm tearing this dump down to build luxury condos." Sloane laughed. "Good luck. The owner isn't selling." "Everyone sells," Julian said, resting his hands on the bar. "Especially when the city condemns the building. My friends here," he gestured to the men, "are from the fire inspector's office. They seem to think this place is a death trap. Faulty wiring, blocked exits." "That's a lie," Sloane snapped. "I checked the codes myself. This place is a fortress." "It's a tinderbox," Julian corrected softly. He leaned in, his eyes cold and dead. "I told you, Sloane, you belong to me. If you won't come back to the firm, if you won't come back to my bed, then I will burn down everything you try to build without me." Sloane grabbed a heavy glass pitcher from the counter. "Get out, now." Julian laughed. He tapped the bar twice. "Enjoy the opening, Sloane. I hear it's going to be hot." He turned and left, his lackeys following. Sloane stood there, shaking. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. She grabbed her phone to call Sierran, but there was no signal. The thick walls of the club sometimes blocked reception. "Damn it," she hissed. She needed to double-check the exits. Chapter 18. Smoke and Mirrors. It was 11 p.m. The soft opening had been canceled. Sloane had sent the staff home early, not wanting to risk Julian making a scene while customers were there. She stayed behind to do a full security sweep, paranoid after Julian's visit. She was in the basement storage room when she smelled it. Acrid, sharp, unmistakable. Gasoline. Sloane dropped her clipboard. She ran up the stairs, her heels clanging on the metal steps. When she reached the main floor, her heart stopped. Thick, black smoke was rolling under the front door. The scent of gasoline was overpowering. "No," she whispered. She ran to the front entrance and pushed the crash bar. It didn't move. It was chained from the outside. She spun around and ran toward the back exit near the kitchen. Locked, jammed tight. Julian hadn't just sent inspectors. He had sent executioners. Panic clawed at her throat. The smoke was getting thicker, filling the room with a gray haze. The fire alarm finally blared, a piercing shriek that echoed in the empty club. Sloane pulled out her phone again. One bar of service. She dialed Sierran. It rang once, twice. "Sloane?" His voice was calm. "Sierran!" she screamed, coughing as the smoke hit her lungs. "The club! Julian, the doors are locked! There's fire! I can't get out!" The line went silent for a split second, then she heard a sound she would never forget. A roar, not a human shout, a roar of pure, unadulterated rage that distorted the speaker on her phone. "Get to the office!" Sierran bellowed. "Lock the door! I'm coming!" The line went dead. Sloane dropped the phone. The flames were licking at the curtains now. She sprinted up the spiral staircase to the glass office, her eyes stinging, her lungs burning. Chapter 19. The Raid. Sloane slammed the glass door of the office shut and locked it. It wouldn't hold the fire back forever, but it would buy her time. Below her, the dance floor was becoming an inferno. The heat was rising, pressing against the glass. But the fire wasn't the only thing moving. Through the haze of smoke, Sloane saw the back door, the heavy steel one, burst open. Not from the fire, but from a battering ram. 3 men in tactical gear and gas masks stormed in. They weren't firefighters. They were carrying canisters. They were here to make sure the job was finished, to make sure there were no witnesses. "There she is," one of them shouted, pointing up at the glass office. "Up the stairs." Sloane backed away from the glass, grabbing a heavy brass lamp from the desk. "Come on," she whispered, terrified tears streaming down her face. "Come on, Siren." The men started up the spiral stairs, their heavy boots thudding ominously. Sloane looked around for a weapon, an exit, anything. There was nothing. She was trapped in a glass box above a burning hell. Suddenly, the front of the building exploded. It wasn't a bomb, it was an impact. The massive double steel doors at the entrance flew off their hinges, crumpling like tin foil. They skidded across the burning dance floor, knocking over tables. A figure stood in the opening, silhouetted by the streetlights outside. Siren. He didn't look human. His clothes were torn, he was breathing so hard his chest heaved like a bellows, and he was moving fast, too fast. "Stop him," the leader of the thugs yelled, turning his weapon away from Sloane and toward the door. 2 of the men opened fire. Bang, bang, bang! Sloane screamed, covering her ears. She watched bullets hit Siren. She saw the impact on his chest, his shoulder. He didn't fall. He didn't even slow down. He charged. He crossed the 60 feet of the dance floor in a blur of motion, leaping over the flames. He tackled the first gunman with the force of a freight train, sending the man flying into the bar with a sickening crunch. "What is he?" the second gunman screamed, backing up. Siren stood up. He was bleeding, but the wounds were already closing. His eyes were glowing gold, bright enough to cut through the smoke. He looked up at Sloane in the office. His face was twisted in agony, not from the bullets, but from the change taking over him. "Look away, Sloane," he roared, his voice distorting into a growl. "Look away!" Chapter 20. The Monster. Sloane didn't look away. She couldn't. The remaining 2 gunmen were terrified, but they were professionals. One of them pulled a shotgun. "Die, you freak!" he yelled, aiming at Siren's head. Siren didn't dodge. He just expanded. The sound was gruesome, the wet snap of bones breaking and reforming. Siren's back arched, his spine elongating with a crack that echoed over the roar of the fire. His skin split, not with blood, but to reveal midnight black fur underneath. Sloane pressed her hands against the glass, her breath fogging it up. Siren? It happened in seconds. The man in the tattered remains of a suit was gone. In his place stood a monster. A wolf, but not a normal wolf. This creature was massive, standing nearly 5 feet tall at the shoulder. Its fur was black as the void, absorbing the light of the fire. Its claws were like black glass daggers, scraping against the concrete floor. The gunman with the shotgun fired. The wolf moved faster than the eye could track. It swiped a massive paw, knocking the shotgun and the man holding it across the room like a toy. The last thug dropped his weapon and fell to his knees. "God! Oh, God!" The wolf snarled, a sound that vibrated in Sloane's very bones. It didn't kill the man. It lunged, snapping its jaws inches from his face, terrifying him into unconsciousness. Then the wolf turned its head. It looked up at the glass office, at Sloane. Its eyes were the same, amber, intelligent, but wild. The fire was getting closer to the stairs. The structural beams were groaning. The wolf crouched and sprang, clearing the entire staircase in one leap, landing on the balcony outside her office door. It reared up on its hind legs, a terrifying mix of man and beast, and smashed the glass door with one strike. Sloane flinched back as shards of glass rained down. She was cornered against the desk, clutching the lamp. The massive black wolf stepped into the office. It filled the room. It smelled of burnt hair, blood, and ozone. It lowered its massive head, bringing its snout inches from her face. Sloane stopped breathing. She stared into the golden eyes, waiting to be eaten. Instead, the wolf whined.
A low, pathetic sound. It nudged her hand with its wet nose, pushing the lamp down. "Sieran?" she whispered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. The wolf huffed, a burst of hot air hitting her face. It turned, offering its broad back to her. It looked over its shoulder, waiting. It wanted her to climb on.
Chapter 21. The Escape. Sloane hesitated for only a fraction of a second. The heat was blistering now, the carpet in the office beginning to smoke. She looked at the massive black wolf waiting for her, its golden eyes filled with an almost human desperation. "If I fall off, I'm suing you," she choked out, grabbing fistfuls of thick, coarse fur. She climbed onto the wolf's back, wrapping her arms around its massive neck. It felt like sitting on a vibrating engine block, pure, coiled power. The wolf didn't wait. It turned and launched itself through the shattered office window. Sloane screamed, burying her face in its fur as they plummeted 2 stories down. She expected the crunch of bone, the hardness of the pavement. Instead, the wolf landed with a heavy, agile thud in the alleyway behind the club, absorbing the impact effortlessly. It didn't stop. It sprinted. They tore through the night streets of the Iron District, moving faster than any car. The wind whipped Sloane's hair back, drying the tears on her cheeks. She held on for dear life, feeling the rhythmic, powerful stride of the beast beneath her. They didn't go to a hospital. They went to a private garage entrance of a sleek, high-rise penthouse a few blocks away. The gate opened automatically as the wolf approached. Inside, the wolf slowed to a trot, finally collapsing on the cool concrete floor of the private garage. Sloane slid off, her legs shaking so hard she could barely stand. She was covered in soot, smelled of smoke, and her dress was ruined. The wolf panted heavily, its tongue lolling out. Then the cracking sound returned. Sloane turned her back, giving him dignity, though she was trembling. Are you done being a canine?" "Yes," a rough, exhausted voice rasped from the floor. She turned back. Kieran was lying on the floor, human again. He was naked, his clothes shredded during the shift. His skin was slick with sweat and soot, and the bullet wounds she had seen earlier were now just faint pink scars, fading before her eyes. He looked up at her, shielding himself slightly with one arm. He looked vulnerable for the first time since she'd met him. He looked terrified that she would scream and run. Sloane stared at him. She stared at the man who had just saved her life by turning into a nightmare. She walked over to a pile of mechanics' towels on a workbench, grabbed a large, clean one, and walked back to him. She threw it at his face. "You have a lot of explaining to do, and put that on. I can't have this conversation while staring at your alpha status." Chapter 22. The Truth. They sat in his living room. Sieran had wrapped the towel around his waist and downed a bottle of water in one gulp. Sloane sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, holding a glass of whiskey he had poured for her. "So," Sloane said, breaking the silence, "werewolf?" "Shifter," Sieran corrected, staring at the floor. "Werewolf implies I'm cursed. I was born this way." "Right, semantics," Sloane said, taking a large gulp of whiskey. "And the staff? Bram? The hungry bartenders?" "Pack," Sieran said. "I'm the alpha. They follow me. They protect what is mine." He looked up at her then, his amber eyes intense. "And you are mine." Sloane felt a blush heat her cheeks. Is that an employment clause or a possessive wolf thing? "It's a soul thing," Sieran said, quietly. He moved from the chair to kneel in front of her. He didn't touch her. He just stayed close, like a devotee at an altar. "I knew it the moment I saw you at the bar. The scent, the pull. You are my mate, Sloane, the other half of my soul." Sloane stared at him. "Your mate? Sieran, we met a week ago. I berated you for your tie." "And I loved every second of it," Sieran admitted, a small, crooked smile touching his lips. "Most people are terrified of me. They smell the predator and run. You looked the predator in the eye and told him to fix his attitude. You are the only thing that calms the beast. Tonight, I almost lost control, but your voice brought me back." Sloane looked at his hands that could crush steel, but were currently resting gently on his own knees, afraid to dirty her dress.
I should run, Sloane whispered. This is insane. You turn into a giant dog. People tried to kill us. I know, Siren said, his voice cracking. I should have told you. I wanted to. I was afraid you'd leave, and if you want to leave now, I'll let you. I'll give you the money, I'll protect you from a distance, and I'll never come near you again. He looked down, resigning himself to losing her. Sloane reached out. She placed her hand on his cheek. His skin was burning hot. He leaned into her touch instantly, closing his eyes and letting out a shuddering breath. You idiot! I think you're scared of a little fur. I survived foster care and Julian Sterling. I can handle a wolf. Siren opened his eyes. Hope, raw and blinding, shone there. Besides, Sloane added, a smirk tugging at her lips, I need a new job. My last boss just burned down my office.
Chapter 23. Surrender. Siren didn't laugh. He just looked at her with such overwhelming worship that Sloane felt her heart skip a beat. I love you, he growled, the words tearing out of him. I have loved you since the moment you sat next to me and ordered whiskey. He reached out then, his hands spanning her waist. He pulled her off the sofa and into his lap, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He inhaled deeply, his nose brushing against her pulse point. Siren, Sloane breathed, her hands tangling in his dark, damp hair. The adrenaline of the night was shifting into something else, something hotter, heavier. Let me take care of you, he murmured against her skin. Let me worship you. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was acclaiming. It was hungry and desperate, tasting of whiskey and smoke. Sloane kissed him back with equal force, pouring all her fear and relief into the contact. He carried her to the bedroom, treating her like she was made of glass, despite the ferocity of his kisses. When he laid her on the sheets, he paused, hovering over her, his eyes glowing gold again. Are you sure? He asked, his voice rough. Once I claim you, I will never let you go. You are stuck with me, forever. Sloane reached up and pulled him down by his neck. Shut up and claim me, Alpha. The night was a blur of heat and sensation. For a man who could tear down doors, Siren was devastatingly careful. He touched her with a reverence that made her want to weep. Every kiss was a promise. Every touch was a vow. When she finally surrendered to the pleasure, crying out his name, she felt the bond he spoke of, a golden tether snapping into place, connecting them. She wasn't just Sloane Vane anymore. She was his, and he, the terrifying Alpha King, was entirely, hopelessly hers. As they lay tangled together in the aftermath, Siren traced the line of her spine with his finger. I'm going to destroy him, Siren whispered into the darkness. Julian, for what he did tonight. Sloane rested her head on his chest, listening to his slow, steady heartbeat. Good, she murmured, sleep dragging her under. Leave nothing left. Chapter 24. Checkmate. 2 days later, Julian Sterling sat in his office, pouring a celebratory scotch. He had heard the news. The Obsidian had burned. No bodies found yet, but surely Sloane was terrified enough to leave town. His assistant knocked on the door. She looked pale. Sir, she said, the SEC is here. The who? Julian frowned. The Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI and, I think, the IRS. Julian stood up. What are you talking about? Before he could move, the doors burst open. Agents and windbreakers swarmed the room. Behind them walked a man in an impeccably tailored suit. Siren Thorne. Siren didn't look like a monster today. He looked like a titan of industry. He walked calmly into Julian's office, holding a file. You can't be here, Julian sputtered. Who are you? I'm the majority shareholder of Obsidian Holdings, Siren said calmly, and as of this morning, I am the owner of the debt your company just defaulted on. What debt? Julian laughed nervously. Sterling Industries is solvent. Was solvent, Siren corrected. He tossed the file onto the desk. It seems your father had some off-book loans that my holding company purchased. I called them in 10 minutes ago. You're bankrupt, Julian. Julian grabbed the file, flipping through it frantically. His face went gray. This is impossible. You can't do this. I just did, Siren said.
He stepped closer, his voice dropped so only Julian could hear. You tried to burn what was mine, so I burned what was yours. The difference is, I used paperwork. Sloane, Julian whispered. Does she know? She helped draft the press release, Siren said with a cold smile. She sends her regards, and she suggests you learn to tie a Windsor knot. You'll need it for court. Siren turned and walked away as the agents moved in to handcuff Julian. As he reached the elevator, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Sloane. Did he cry? Siren typed back. Almost. Sloane, good boy. Come home. Dinner's ready. It's takeout. I don't cook.
Chapter 25. Epilogue. 6 months later. The Winter Solstice Charity Gala was back. The ballroom was filled with the same people, the same champagne, and the same gossip, but the atmosphere was different. Everyone was watching the entrance. I heard she started her own firm, a woman whispered. Vane Consulting. They only take special clients. I heard she married him, a man replied. The guy who owns the city. The doors opened. Sloane walked in. She wore red. Not the same dress as before. This one was even more stunning, a deep crimson velvet that draped over her curves like liquid fire. She looked radiant, powerful, and utterly untouchable. On her arm was Siren Thorne. He wore a tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. He looked dangerous, yes, but he also looked happy. His hand rested possessively on Sloane's lower back, his thumb rubbing small circles there. They moved through the crowd like royalty. No one dared to sneer. No one dared to whisper. They parted like the Red Sea. They reached the balcony overlooking the city. Sloane leaned against the railing, sighing contentedly. You know, she said, looking up at him, Julian got 5 years for arson and fraud. Too short, Karen grunted, but acceptable. And my firm just signed the Dragon Coalition. They need help with a hoarding scandal. Kieran chuckled, the sound vibrating in his chest. You're going to rule the world, Sloane. We, she corrected. She turned to face him, smoothing the lapel of his jacket. We are going to rule the world. The wind picked up, a chilly gust from the north. Sloane shivered slightly in her backless dress. Without a word, Kieran took off his tuxedo jacket. He didn't throw it this time. He draped it gently over her shoulders, pulling it tight to keep her warm. Sloane looked up at him, her eyes dancing. Are you going to growl at everyone again? Kieran smirked. He leaned down and kissed her, a slow, deep kiss that made the rest of the world fade away. When he pulled back, his eyes were glowing with that familiar golden heat. Let them look, Kieran whispered, kissing her forehead. They know who you belong to now. Sloane smiled, snuggling into his warmth. And they know who belongs to me. The end.